And it's all systems go for the president to deliver his seventh State of the Nation address. Not at the national legislature, because as you know, that was burnt down in a brazen arson attack, but at the Cape Town City Hall tomorrow evening. And I mentioned our destroyed Parliament building because it's emblematic of the mess that affects so many aspects of the country we live in, is it not? I mean, there is a sense at times that things just happen to us and we watch powerless to do anything about them. Or have we been agents of our own demise? That's even worse, isn't it? So whilst we dither, other countries are growing. So is there anything President Ramaphosa can say or do to get us out of our current mess? That's a question that's been posed by our guest this morning. John Mattison is the Executive Director of Ideas for Africa. He's also the author of Cyril's Choices, an Agenda for Reform. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our show. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Bongani.
Yesterday, I asked the listeners of this program if life is better now than it was in 2018 when Cyril Ramaphosa became president of the Republic, as a kind of opening gambit. I'd love your reflections on that thought.
Well, I think, there's the actual conditions and the perception. I think in some ways the perception is more tired and worse. That's a combination of COVID, but also the politics. People had such hope from President Ramaphosa, and now there's such disappointment. And so, I think, if you read the various surveys the last 2 years, people have had a really rough time in different ways, financial, health-wise, and people's faith in the system is lower than it ever was.
I asked that question, of course, and we are speaking because of that piece you wrote in the Business Day yesterday, talking about how to get out of our current mess. What is the extent of the mess as you see it?
Well, many people talk about this, and what can one add? I mean, it's pervasive. I mean, if you see what happened at the mining in Durban yesterday, 30% of mineral exports couldn't happen last year because of Transnet, and that's getting worse. I was at the Durban docks a few weeks ago, and there were all these cars being brought on trucks because the trains weren't running properly anymore. So, the trouble is it's pervasive. You look around and you're hard put to find an area where things are improving.
I was fascinated, though, because one of the things you said in your piece is that whilst we're, of course, in this continuing mess that you've just described, other countries around the world are getting on with it, right? And we often focus on the success of the Asian tigers, but there are countries even on our own continent whose path we could follow, Ethiopia being one.
Yes, there are several examples, Bongani, but I think people will be surprised to know that Ethiopia was the fastest growing country in the world, not just in Africa, in the world, from 2009 to 2019. Now, they got into some violence in one area, and that's obviously damaged them since. But it doesn't detract from the fact that Ethiopia got it right, because the government thought things out in a particular way. And there are other African countries, including Rwanda, and we can debate about their politics, but the politics isn't the vital thing. Development economics has come a long way since the days of the World Bank and structural adjustment in Zimbabwe and other places. People have learned, even the World Bank acknowledges, have made big mistakes. But the successful countries in Africa and elsewhere have learned that government has to take a different approach. And I mean, where we are in South Africa now, we have to have a much stronger, a different political culture. We need a joint cabinet responsibility. You can't have one minister contradicting another and getting away with it, because that's a disaster for people trying to invest.
Policy certainty goes out of the window when that happens. You say in your piece, first, for a country to succeed, first you need to understand who you are, what you can do, and what you have that the rest of the world might want. So from where we sit, what are our capabilities? What strengths could we focus on and capitalize on?
Yes. Well, first of all, you have to, what the research shows in Africa and elsewhere is you must have a realistic understanding of the capacities of your state. It's not as simple as saying privatize everything, but you have to understand our state has a strong treasury, for instance, but many of our other departments are extremely weak. So obviously, on that principle, you would never suggest establishing a second state ESCOM when you know you can't run the first. So those are just obvious things. And the second thing is a culture of constant, immediate error correction. Now, in South Africa, over the last 30 years, there have been three major global trends that had enormous job-creating potential. The information boom of the 90s, the resource boom led by China in the noughties, and since then the whole climate change adaptation, including green energy. And we missed all three, or substantially missed all three, because the government never focused on them in a unified way. I mean, the most obvious example is digital migration still hasn't happened. The Digital Commission completed its work in 2002. That's 20 years ago. Other countries in Africa, even our smaller neighbors, have done it long ago. We still haven't completed it. And that costs us jobs, because the digital migration will free up frequency to bring us cheaper and faster internet. Our internet is far too expensive, compared to our peers. So there are lessons we can learn from many countries, but those three would be, there are many other examples, of course. The township economy, the agriculture has potential. But those three are global trends that were perfectly geared for South Africa to take advantage of. And we still can, but everything takes too long and gets mired in political conflict and doesn't happen properly, and certainly not in time.
Let's talk about the question of leadership, right? You mentioned ministers who contradict each other, but also where is the leadership of the guy at the top, right? One of the things that you mentioned, for example, was the idea that nobody invests in South Africa per se, but they rather look at different sectors to be able to identify where they could get a return on that investment. You think investment should be sectoral in terms of how it is led. And that speaks directly, to my mind at least, to the issue of leadership and holding whoever's responsible for various portfolios accountable to do their job.
Well, exactly. I was very optimistic when President Ramaphosa took office, because he'd been chairman of MTN, and of Times Media. So I assumed he knew anything I knew as having been a regulator in South Africa and ICASA and so on, that he would know everything I know, that digital migration is not an expensive project. It requires political will, but the benefits in job creation are enormous. Numerous research studies have shown this in South Africa. Even the Treasury has acknowledged it. And so I thought he would make that a top priority, call in his minister and say, okay, I want to report every Monday morning at 8 on progress I want it completed in X number of months. Well, since then we had while I was on the board of the SABC over 18 months, we had 5 ministers of communications. Now that's devastating for anybody who's worked in government. You know that means inaction. And each minister comes in and they have been told that they've got to get digital migration going. But they don't get to the bottom of the real issues, and that's why they land up in court having to defend themselves and losing court cases, because there are a number of issues that have to be properly tackled, and people in the field know all those issues. They just have to be properly consulted and listened to and taken seriously.
Are there any bold moves the president could make tomorrow night? Like the biblical Esau, I guess what I'm asking, is there any blessing left for us?
Well, I think that what we're looking for, the only thing that will help is, as you say, for leadership to become more decisive, to hold people accountable, have a meeting every week, a report back every week in the key sectors that I mentioned, for example, if you'd set those as priorities, because there are many, many hundreds of thousands of jobs available in all three sectors and a great future, and we could spread into Africa. But as we are now, I mean, I think more and more analysts are looking to 2024 and saying, you know, that's when we'll see potential for change, and it may not be much better, but that's what we've got to work for and prepare for, so that any coalition government that comes in 2024 has got to be properly prepared and aware of these kind of issues and how they would make things better.
John Maddison, appreciate your time. Executive Director there at Ideas for Africa, is also the author of Cyril's Choices, an Agenda for Reform.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.